Don't move, or your friend here gets shot, Diana said. Calm down. We don't want any trouble, Vince said. Well, neither do I, so I suggest you tell your boss to stop searching for me, Diana said. Tell Crawford that his little manhunt is over and that he needs to leave me alone. Crawford? We don't know anyone named Crawford, Vince said. Please. A bunch of men burst out into this house and saying that you don't work for some lunatic madman, Diana said. We're just people, Vince exclaimed. We had no idea this place was already occupied. Wait, Lee said. I know you. You know me? How? You are with Crawford, aren't you? Diana said. No, I heard your voice on before. You're Diana. Your husband's name's Ed, and you have a baby named Clementine, Lee said. Diana's eyes widened when Lee mentioned the baby's name. How did you know that? Diana asked. Were you one of my neighbors? I was never good with faces. No, a couple days after everything happened, I somehow got in your backyard. I went inside and I heard you on the answering machine. When I found your daughter, I've been taking care of her ever since, Lee said. Tears formed in Diana's eyes and she said, My baby? She's alive? Yes, Lee said. Suddenly Diana released Bud and she ran off in the direction where the men came to find Clementine. Bud huffed from being held at gunpoint, ready to steady himself. Bud, you all right? Lee asked as he walked up to his younger brother. Yeah, Bud said. That was close. So that's Clementine's mother? I thought she was dead. So did I, Lee said. Her last message didn't sound good, but I know that's her. Well, I guess she's got a lot of explaining to do. We need to know what happened and who this Crawford guy is, Bud said. Yeah, Lee said with a nod. He turned his head to look back into the living room. Bud and Vince followed behind him. 3 men entered the living room with Diana holding Clementine close. The both of them were seen crying. Is everything okay? Lee asked. Diane huffed and nodded her head. Thank you. Thank you so much for protecting and taking care of my baby. She's all I have left, Diana said. Lee smiled and said, You're welcome. You should be proud of her. She's a sweetheart. Diana smiled and looked down at Clementine. Did this man take care of you? Clementine nodded and said, I love him. He's like Daddy. Diana looked up at him and smiled. Thank you. You're welcome, Lee said. I'm Lee. Well, Lee, I owe you a lot for keeping her safe, Diana said. You don't owe me anything. I'm just glad that I was here, Lee said. Diana smiled as the group heard footsteps coming from down the stairs. Lee turned away and saw Kenny and Ben. What's going on? Who's she? Kenny asked. This is Diana. She's Clementine's mother, Lee said. Lee, you can't go and believe every little thing you hear. We don't know her, Kenny said. I know it's her. I found her a picture of her and her husband in Clementine's home. They were holding Clementine in the photo, Lee said. I mean, come on, Ken. Didn't she look like Clementine? Kenny grumbled before he continued. Okay, so if you're her mother, then where were you the last several months? Kenny, Katja said in a disapproving tone. Diana frowned and she said, I wanted to get home so badly, but it didn't work out. When all this happened, I went to find my husband at the hospital and he became one of those things. I thought I was going to die, but I don't know where these guys with guns saved my life. I knew better than to go home straight away. I wasn't trying strong enough at the time, so I reluctantly stayed. They taught me to get stronger so I can handle myself. By the time I felt confident enough to get out of here by myself came around, the men saved me and turned me into absolute monsters. They started to kill off the elderly, the children, the sick. I barely made it out. It was obvious that Diana was upset over what happened. Mommy okay? Clementine asked. Where's Daddy? Diana sniffled before she turned to look at Clementine. I'm sorry, baby girl. Daddy's in heaven. But I not want him in heaven. I want him here with you and me, Clementine said with tears forming in her eyes. I know, baby. I'm sorry, Diane said as she hugged Clementine. The toddler started to cry along with her mother. Diana did her best to comfort Clementine, but she was barely keeping it together. Lee went over and placed a supportive hand on the toddler's back. Everything will be all right, Lee said. His words brought a sense of comfort to the toddler. He looked to Diana, who was smiling at him. Thank you. Lee stood and back up. I'll give you some time with Clem. I'm sure you've got a lot of catching up to do, Lee said. Diana nodded before she looked back to Clementine. Lee went out to the kitchen with Bud following him. Hey, you alright? Bud asked. Yeah, I'm glad Clem's got her mother back, but where does that leave me? I've always wanted to have a kid. A family, Lee said as he leaned against the counter. You still can, Bud said. I mean, it's not like Diana's going to force you to stay away from Clementine. And we all know that Clem loves you. Lee nodded his head and said, I don't know, Bud. I don't want to get away from in the way of Clem and her and the only family she's got left. Lee, did you ever felt like Carly was in the way back of the motor inn? Bud asked. What? Of course not. You know I liked her. Bud, you know that I was happy for you two, Lee said. Well, think about your current situation. As strong as Diana is, she is going to need help in raising her daughter. You saved her daughter at the beginning of all this, Bud said. You're not going to come in between them. You're going to help them. I hope you're right, Bud, Lee said, a small smile formed on his lips. Of course I'm right. I am smarter than you after all, Bud said with a smirk. Now I don't know about that, Lee chuckled again. Come on, you two, Kenny said. He then came into the kitchen along with Chuck following behind. What's going on? Lee asked. There's a herd that's died down out there. We're going back to look for the boat, Kenny said. You sure, Ken? What about the people that Diana was talking about? Bud asked. Kenny scoffed and he said, Are you actually going to be believing what he said? Come on. He then turned and walked out the door. I guess I don't get much else to do, Chuck said. So what's your plan, Chuck? Bud asked. You've been by yourself for all this. Why do you want to be with us? Well, I think mostly you're all a good company and the kids are fun to watch. I miss having some of my own. They always manage to keep your spirits up, Chuck said. Well, thanks for sticking around, Lee said. Sure thing, Chuck said. He then walked out of the kitchen to follow Kenny, and Lee did the same and left the house. The group of men made their way down the street to get to the harbor to find a boat. Kenny took the lead, and he kept looking around. Ken, is everything all right? Bud asked. You haven't been yourself for a while. I'm fine, Kenny said. I just need to get on the boat so I can keep my family safe. They're fine, Ken. The group is looking out for them, Lee said. I hope you're right, Kenny said. As far as I'm concerned, I won't feel safe until we're off the mainland. And what then? Where will we land? Bud asked. It don't matter. Kenny stopped, but he stopped himself when the whole group heard a bell in the distance. Kenny growled and pulled out his handgun. That stupid fuck is touring with us again. Hold on. It sounds like it came from the other direction, Bud said. He indicated to the opposite direction of the river. Get down, Bud said. He then ran over to a nearby alley with the other men following them. They watched as several walkers limped and crawled towards the direction of the sound. What the fuck is going on? Kenny spat. I don't know, but whoever's ringing that bell might be doing us a favor, Lee said. Whatever, man. I need to find out who is ringing that, and I'll fucking ring their bell. Kenny spat. Good one, Lee said with a chuckle. The sound of the bell soon ceased. It looks clear, Bud said. He then got out from the cover, but he kept his stare aimed at the streets the way they had came from. Kenny stood up and walked down the road to the river. I think we're good, Bud, Lee said. They then turned around and were surprised to come face to face with another group of survivors. Well, what do we have here? One of the men said as they approached the group. I don't think I've seen you people here before. Who the hell are you? Kenny inquired. Oh, you're definitely not from around here. You see, we're a little group known as Crawford. Our mission is simple. Survive, the man said. Lee didn't like this. They were all armed with assault rifles and handguns. Funny, we have the same goal, Chuck said. Listen, we don't want any trouble here, Bud said. We just came down to the river to look for a boat. The man chuckled and said, Well, son, I'm afraid you're out of luck. You see, we own this whole city. Anything is worth scavenging is ours. And that includes everything you have. The other man spoke up. Screw that, Kenny spat. The first man stepped up and punched Kenny in the face. Kenny groaned as he fell backwards towards the ground. Let's try this again. You give me what I want and I won't kill your ungrateful asses. We decline, Bud said. He pulled out his handgun and shot the man in the face. Fuck, one of the men said. took that out of confidence and they had earlier, replaced with surprise, then anger. "Kill them," the other man said. Lee ran to get away from the men, and he turned back and fired the man who were chasing them from before, slipping into the alleyway. He couldn't believe what Bud just did. Lee huffed as he stopped at the opening. He then looked around for his fellow group members. "Bud, Kenny, Chuck," Lee said. He heard distant gunshots and looked around. He swore underneath his breath when the gunshot flew past by him by mere inches. He ran over to the dumpster and hid so that the man didn't see him. I heard footsteps with a couple of men panting. "Asshole! Got away!" a man's voice was heard. Lee could hear a muffled voice over the radio. "No matter. We got 2 of them." "What about the other one?" the man said. "Dead. They didn't have a choice," the other man said. "We'll let Albers and Crawford deal with the other 2. "Sounds good," the man said. Lee heard footsteps going in the opposite direction from where he was. He could tell that they were getting away from him, since the sound of footsteps were fading. Once they were far enough away, Lee got up to get as far away from the opening as possible. He never would have thought that Bud would kill someone like that. However, he didn't also think that anyone was in the city. It seemed like a ghost town when he and his group got inside the city. Lee got a few yards before he was stopped. A figure approached them at the end of the alleyway. The figure wore a red hooded sweatshirt, surgical mask, and brown cargo pants, and black shoes. Lee went for his gun, but figured was too fast. The figure disarmed him and pinned him against the wall. "I saw what happened," the figure said. "I don't know if I can trust you, but we have a common enemy." It sounded like the figure was a woman. Now that Lee had a good look at the figure, there were several feminine features. His suspicions were confirmed when she removed her surgical mask and put the hood down. "Now, I want answers. Who the hell are you and why are you here?" the woman asked. "My name's Lee. I was a history professor at the UGA, Lee said. "I came here with my group." "Well, that was a bad idea," the woman said. She relaxed her grip on Lee. "The name's Molly." "Who are those guys?" Lee asked. "Assholes. Their leader is a man named Alberson Crawford. The city went into shit and the military failed. He gathered several survivors and put up a section around the city. When the walkers became less of a problem, he started to shift his focus on the sick, elderly, and the kids," Molly explained. "He killed them?" Lee asked. "He definitely killed the sick and elderly. Most of the kids were forced to leave, which is a death sentence," Molly said. "Oh my gosh," Lee muttered. He couldn't imagine someone doing that. He looked up to Molly and he said, "My group and I don't work that way." "Well, that's good," Molly said. "Maybe I could trust you." Lee nodded before he said, "I gotta get back to my group. We need to figure out a way to get Bud, Ken, and Chuck back." "All right, lead the way," Molly said. Lee then nodded and walked in the direction to the large house that the group was in. Molly was alongside him. He then looked around the streets and said, "For a city, this place doesn't seem that many walkers." "Walkers?" Molly said. "Those walking corpses that eat people," Lee said. "That's what my group and I call them." "Oh, you could thank Crawford and his gang of assholes for that," Molly said. "They've killed quite a few, and if a building seemed dangerous to go into, they board it up." Lee then looked over to one of the nearby buildings and he said, "So, how do you know about them?" "Everyone knows about them. Rumors spread around like crazy like a ghost story." "Except this one is real," Molly said. "So what about you and your group? How did you get here?" "We were on a train," Lee said. "Got us to Savannah in a couple of days." "Okay, I guess that explains things to an extent," Molly said. As they rounded the corner, Lee then could see a house, but he can also see a car parked out in front of it. The car wasn't there before, and the most disturbing, the car was intact. Every car in the city appeared to be picked clean. "Oh no," Lee muttered. "I take that car doesn't belong to you?" Molly said. "It doesn't, no," Lee said. He raced towards the house with Molly running behind him.